Hello and welcome. Is a shadow surge in Afghanistan more significant than President Obama's announced surge in U.S. troops? America may be sending 30,000 soldiers to the war-torn region, but in their wake comes that shadow of around 56,000 contractors, according to a congressional agency report. And not everyone's happy about the often questionable role these independent companies have. Military contractors are being used to do the work that the U.S. State Department, Pentagon and CIA once did themselves, from handling security and communications to providing maintenance of facilities and supplies. Up until recently, it also included interrogations, snatch and grab operations, and even intelligence gathering for U.S. military drone bombing attacks. But the rise in the use of private companies has raised several questions, such as what law governs the contractors and how can they be held accountable for abuses? And can they cause damage to the American mission to win hearts and minds of the local population? Well, domestically, many U.S. lawmakers are worried about the waste and corruption that has accompanied and in some cases continues to accompany the contracting process. So today we ask, what role will private military contractors play in Afghanistan as the Obama administration boosts its presence in that conflict? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we'll take your phone calls on the show as well. Well, joining me today is Jeremy Scahill, a journalist who's been focusing on the use of private military companies. He's a correspondent for the U.S. radio and TV program Democracy Now! And a frequent contributor to The Nation weekly news magazine. His 2007 book, Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army, tells the story of the privatization of war in the 21st century. Jeremy's joining us from New York. And here with me in Washington, D.C. is Dov Zakheim, a former government official whose job it was for years to pick through the government's wartime contracts. Dr. Zakheim was the comptroller of the U.S. Department of Defense from 2001 to 2004, where he was asked to help track down $2.6 trillion, yes, trillion, dollars worth of unaccounted transactions. Dr. Zakheim was also the Pentagon's coordinator of civilian programs in Afghanistan from 2002 to 2004. He's currently a senior vice president at the consulting firm Booz Allen Hamilton. Gentlemen, I welcome you both to the show. Jeremy, good to have you back on, and here we are talking about private contractors again. And I wonder that more private contractors in Afghanistan than actual soldiers, and the numbers expected to rise with the extra troops that President Obama is sending. Are you surprised?
Unfortunately, I'm not surprised. I mean, what we're seeing right now is the Obama administration not only sort of equaling the Bush-era privatization of war, but actually surpassing it. The total number of contractors, and I've talked to congressional sources that say that this is conservative, but the total number of contractors in Afghanistan right now numbers about 121,000 alongside 68,000 U.S. troops. So this is looking a lot like the Obama administration's job program for the benefit of large war corporations like the one that Mr. Zakheim works for, which is basically a parallel CIA.
Well, we'll get on to Mr. Zakheim in just a second, but let me ask you, when you know, obviously the company Blackwater has changed its name since you wrote about it, and I wonder, considering all the fuss about contractors that has been out in the news, why hasn't anything changed in the way they are contracted and employed?
Well, the sort of dirty public secret in Washington is that these private sector forces are necessary to the Obama administration's policies in both Iraq and Afghanistan. What is particularly disturbing is that in just the past several months, the Obama administration has doubled the number of so-called security contractors, armed contractors like those that work for Blackwater, Triple Canopy, and DynCorp. Blackwater, despite all of the scandals, the investigations, the indictments, continues to work for the State Department, the CIA, and the Pentagon in Afghanistan, and is continuing to bid on huge counter-narcotics contracts in Afghanistan. If there was ever a company that begged for some kind of oversight or intervention, it's Blackwater, and instead they just keep winning huge contracts.
Dr. Zakheim, I'm glad you could join us as well, sir.
Thank you.
Your response to obviously some of the things that Jeremy's been saying, and a little bit about your time looking into the way that the contracts were handled.
Well, let me start by saying my firm is certainly not a parallel CIA. We actually have a handful, literally a handful of people in Afghanistan, and they go in and out. So that's just one claim that's made that I think is indicative of the misunderstandings generally about contractors. There is a reason why we have so many contractors, and that is they are replacing the people who used to wear the uniform, who provided what's called combat service support. I was just in Afghanistan 3 weeks ago. If you go into the dining facilities, the cooks, the people who serve you the food, the people who clean up the place are all contractors. And so the question is this what you want soldiers and sailors and airmen to do? or is this something that you can contract out? And obviously, given that we are going to add some 30,000 people, we need to feed them, we need to house them, we need janitors, we need people to clean the toilets. This is most of what these contractors do.
With those tasks apart, obviously the contractors have been given far greater responsibilities, been far more involved in what is essentially a military role. I can understand you saying about the reason, the supplies and the cooking and so on and so forth. What about the other tasks that essentially should be a security issue?
The security roles is really due to a number of factors. The first is that in the past, the military people provided security, particularly for the State Department. That's not going on now, so the state has to hire people. When you go to the embassy, as I did in Kabul or the embassy in Baghdad, you need some kind of guards, and they're hiring guards. By the way, the guards at the Kabul embassy are not from Blackwater. Blackwater doesn't even exist anymore. It's now called XE, and to the best of my knowledge, it's not winning contracts. It's bidding on contracts, but it's not winning them, and it's got a problem in Iraq. It can't even bid anymore. So, we have to look at this in a balanced way.
Well, let me get Jeremy to chip in here and take your views on what Dr. Zakheim was saying there about the necessary role of contractors.
Right. Well, clearly, Mr. Zakheim didn't watch the congressional testimony last week that included Blackwater's senior vice president, Fred Royce, who explicitly told the Congress that Blackwater is, in fact, bidding on contracts in Afghanistan right now. The reality is that Blackwater is providing the security for Ambassador Eikenberry. They provide security for Hillary Clinton when she goes over to Afghanistan, and they provide security for visiting delegations from the U.S. Congress, and those contracts are valid for at least another year. And while Blackwater has had trouble in Iraq, they remain on the ground in Iraq as well under an aviation contract with the Obama administration that's been extended indefinitely. I should also say that for Mr. Zakheim to act as though his company just has a few people going in and out of Afghanistan is ridiculous. The firm Booz Allen is, in fact, a massive company that benefits almost exclusively from U.S. taxpayer funds and operates a gigantic private intelligence network that is essentially just living off of U.S. taxpayers and privatizing U.S. intelligence.
I'll get Dr. Zakheim, I'll get you to respond in just a second. But Jeremy, is there any reason why those contractors shouldn't be employed to do those security issues, like you said, for Ambassador Eikenberry and for Secretary Clinton?
Because they've had a documented track record of opening fire on unarmed civilians, and in the words of some top U.S. military commanders, such as Brigadier General Carl Horst, they run around, they do stupid stuff, and it causes blowback on the U.S. military forces. These are companies that time and again have shown themselves to be above the law, have hurt the actual U.S. mission in the countries where they've operated, and have caused the deaths and injuries of scores of civilians. There's ample reason to suggest that these companies should not be used for what are inherently governmental functions, and I believe many in the Congress agree with that.
I'll get on to perhaps how our roles may have changed, but Dr. Zakheim, I guess you want to respond to that.
Well, the first thing is he did not say that we have thousands upon thousands of people in Afghanistan. We don't. I will assert that for the record. We are not in Afghanistan in any big way, nor in Iraq, by the way. We are a government contractor and not just a DOD contractor. So that's that. As for Blackwater, again, the assertion was
you work for all CIA, State Department, anyone that will hire you. You guys will work for whoever will hire you.
Excuse me, I listen to you, sir, so you kindly listen to me, please. Okay. Thank you. Now, the second thing is, in terms of Blackwater, yes, they are bidding. That doesn't mean they're going to win. They've got, first of all, they're not Blackwater anymore. You just showed on the screen they're called XE. They have a problem. The problem is that...
Well, you're behind the times. They're now U.S. Training Center. They changed their name again. Changed their name again. Okay. You're not even current.
Well, look, if you want to engage in polemic and you want to interrupt me at every place, go right ahead. But then there's no conversation. I've been asked a question. I'm answering it.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a chance in a second, Jeremy. Let's hear what Dr. Zakheim says.
Regardless of their name, the problem that they face is twofold. The first is they're not going to be able to do the kind of wild cowboy stuff they did before. They're now under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. They may find themselves prosecuted. Some of them have been prosecuted. That's number one. Number two is the government is going to be very leery about issuing them contracts precisely because of the kind of polemic that it generates. There are other companies out there, and as long as the Hillary Clintons of this world need some security, or the Carl Eikenberrys, they're going to have to get somebody to contract because they don't have enough military people to do the job and also fight the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
Well, I'll say, Dr. Zakheim, if it's just really a name change, essentially a cosmetic name change, why bother to change the name?
I suspect that, you know, they'll have their reasons, I don't know. I suspect that they're trying, hopefully, to somehow get away from a name that has given them problems. But at the end of the day, everybody knows who they are, and they will have difficulties. You know, they might win contracts, but it's not going to be a slam dunk, to use a poor phrase.
I'll get back to Jeremy in a second, but Dr. Zakheim, I want to put an email to you that came in from a viewer in Helmand in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Ajmer Imtiaz, who says, what is the benefit of U.S. military contractors for the people of Afghanistan? Is there any advantage for the growth of local contractors in the country? Why not have more local contractors?
In fact, the number that you just heard, the much larger number, is due to the fact that we have Afghan subcontractors. So what really goes on is you have prime contractors that are American or Western European or whatever, Australian, and they contract out to Afghans. In fact, it is U.S. policy to contract out to Afghans so that we're creating more jobs for the Afghan people, and all of the civilian side of the work, the development work, all of that, the focus is indeed on creating jobs for Afghans. So it looks like you've got all these contractors, but so many of them are Afghan contractors.
Jeremy, a chance for you to respond, but also an email to you, if I may, please, from Robert Freeman in Maryland in the USA, who wrote in saying, this phenomenon of having so many contractors compared to troops is relatively new to me. When I was in the military, we performed all functions of the military, from mess cooking to providing security for embassy personnel. Controlling military actions is dictated by a strict chain of command. What chain of command controls the actions of contractors? Now, I know in the figures you quoted in your book, Blackwater, were actually quite eye-opening about the situation in Iraq, revealing that obviously there was such a heavy dependence on contractors there, and of course Afghanistan seems in the same direction. What's any change in the chain of command from what you know?
Well, on paper, there has been a change, and there's been an implementation of theoretical systems that are supposed to track contractors and make sure that the theater commander from the U.S. military is aware of all movement and presence of contractors. But the reality, and it's been identified in Government Accountability Office reports and in congressional investigations recently, is that contractors continue to operate outside of the U.S. military chain of command, and that can be dangerous for U.S. troops and civilians alike. And you have situations where contractors, particularly armed ones, can find themselves engaged in a limited firefight with U.S. soldiers because there is not that kind of coordination that has been pledged to implement by various members of the administration or within the U.S. military. I have to correct the record here of something that Mr. Zakheim said. Blackwater has 4 individuals now that have been indicted on manslaughter charges. They have not yet been convicted. They very well may get off because of the way that U.S. law was written for contractors that are not Department of Defense contractors. And whether it's Blackwater or Triple Canopy, the company that the Obama administration gave Blackwater's prime contract to in Iraq, the reality is that these forces do remain above the law. Blackwater has shot innocent civilians in Afghanistan. Contrary to Mr. Zakheim saying they're not going to get away with cowboy activities, they did in fact get away with killing 2 unarmed Afghans in a car. So this, in May, this continues on, and Mr. Zakheim's friends from the mercenary industry continue to make a killing off of the killing.
Okay, I'm going to get back to a response in a moment, so I'm going to just take a very short break here because we have to pause for our discussion, but we'll be right back.